Well, Mohammed Nalla joins me now to discuss a report that he wrote on structural reforms. Mohammed, a couple of weeks ago you were in the studio and a couple of times you plagiarized yourself. You referred to this report you had written and you were clearly concerned to share some of it. So we thought it's clearly been a big thing for you, and it could be an influential report. So let's get you back and talk about it. What is it and what have you done with it?
Okay, so thanks for the time. I mean, a subject like this is so meaty that even if we spend this entire morning discussing it, we're not even really going to scratch the surface.
So what we'll do is talk the highlights and we'll tell people how to get hold of it.
Absolutely. So, I mean, if anyone follows the CNBC Africa or even your Twitter handle, my Twitter handle, I've put a link to the actual report on Twitter, so they're more than welcome to go through and actually have a look at it. And let's maybe rewind a little bit. Let's look at where this report was born from. So, we went through all of this noise around the elections, and then there was all of this hoopla around the National Development Plan. And so we said, let's have a look at this. Let's have a look at it in a non-partisan manner. Let's have a look at it in a balanced manner, and let's see, is it achievable? Is the National Development Plan, or the NDP, it's much touted, but is it achievable? And what do we need to do, in our opinion, to actually achieve what are very noble objectives that are set out in that NDP? So that was, I guess, what resulted in this report actually coming through. It's not definitive by any stretch of the imagination. The real intent behind it is to stimulate public debate. It's to have these discussions. It's to get the guy out on the street thinking about these things, because that's really the only way we're going to get this economy and this country onto the next level. So when we have a look at the report at a very high level, we look at a couple of key critical pillars. And if we look at those pillars, those include labor reforms that need to actually go through. We look at educational reform, social reform, and how these then cascade down into the actual economy, into the development of small businesses, the development of a savings culture, broadening the tax base. And then we also look at the larger institutional factors around that, saying, what has South Africa gotten right? What have we gotten wrong? An interesting thing is we're often quoted, I mean, you were chatting to Ian slightly earlier around the security of tenure and property rights. And if we have a look at the World Economic Forum and we look at how South Africa ranks in terms of protection of property rights, we actually, I stand corrected, but I think we're in the top 10 globally. So we have historically been performing quite well. The question is, can we sustain that momentum? Because something like property rights are really fundamental as an underpinning to this economy if we hope to actually go and attract that foreign capital. There's this US-Africa summit that's happening in Washington. If we stand a good chance of attracting that capital in the form of foreign direct investments, there are a couple of things we've got to get in place before this goes through.
Let's pick up a couple of your points there. The one is the labour market, which I'll come to in a moment, and the other one is property rights. So it's what they call the rearview mirror. Historically, we've got a very good record, but there are noises about the future, such as farmland, private farmers having to give up half their land. Now, that sounds like a proposal whereby you end up negotiating and you end up giving 20% and everyone's relieved. 50% is... But that's the kind of noise that's going on. So how do you address that, where there are policy noises coming in and a government, a newly elected government, some faces the same, some new, that really is feeling that it's got to do something?
So first and foremost, we've got to look at where some of these noises come from. I mean, a lot of the slightly more radical policy proposals, because it's not policy yet, it's open for debate, stem from a place where I guess in some quarters government is saying that the private sector and private citizenry have been slow to transform. We've been through this for 20 years and they're not necessarily seeing the gains that they need to be seeing in order to address the long historical imbalances that this economy and this country still that's still quite pervasive. So, undoubtedly, that's not going to ring very well with foreign investors. It's not going to ring very well with local investors. It represents a significant headwind to any further investment in this economy by South Africans. And that is why we've got to put stuff like property rights to bed. We've got to put the nationalization debate to bed. We've got to say South Africa is open for business.
Fast asleep.
Well, this is the thing. It comes and goes, and the government will come out and they'll say it's not policy, and they'll say, yes, the debates have happened, but it has been put to bed. But the fact that it keeps on creeping back up onto the agenda, that's what makes foreign investors nervous. When we look at something like social grants, for example, again, it's absolutely necessary to address the imbalances of the past, but how we go about doing it, possibly we're not doing it in the best possible way. And I'll tell you what I mean when I say this. We look at South Africa. We're not short on resources. We do have considerable resources and we have access to capital. So if we look at our debt to GDP ratio, it's not as extended as the developed world and even some other emerging markets. But if we look at the bang for buck that we're getting for those social grants, if we look at the bang for buck that we're getting out of our healthcare, out of our educational systems, that's where we fall short. So very strong focus, I guess, there with the appointment of Praveen Gordhan as the Minister of Cooperative Governance. It means government's aware of it.
The one appointment where you take some hope from things.
And you're starting to see action already. He's sitting down with municipalities and saying, you spent how much on consultants? Why? So those are important questions. But if you look at something simple like social grants, let's hone in on that. We can look to international best practice. Yes, every country is different. But if you look at, for example, Brazil, they've done some very interesting things there. There's something called the Bolsa Familia in Brazil, where what they do is they attach your social grant to certain things where you, as the recipient, are held accountable. So, for example, if there's an education grant for the child, you've got to make sure that that child has attended school for a minimum of 90% of the year. This ensures that your money starts to be well spent. If, for example, you're collecting an unemployment grant, under their program, you've got to show that you've actively sought employment, that you've done something in terms of bettering yourself and adding to your skills base. So this is what I'm saying. I'm saying we've got the money. I'm saying don't disband the social grant system because there are a heck of a lot. I mean, we've got a massive base that we need to bring back up to a reasonable standard within this economy.
18 million people.
Absolutely. So South Africa is always going to be what I would call a socio-capitalist country. We've got a capitalist mind frame and framework, but we've got these massive social imbalances that we need to address. Let's just address those in a much more proactive and a more responsible manner where people are actually held accountable for what they're actually getting.
Let's look at the things that are not contested. Everyone agrees the education system needs fixing. The big report on the weekend about Angie Motshekga, the education minister, saying the matric standard needs to improve and that kind of thing, and everyone agrees on that. The problem with the NDP, in my view, is that there are parts of it that are not contested, like everyone agrees on education, might not agree on all the solutions, but it's complex. The labour area, now that is contested. There's no doubt that there is contestation, and it's acknowledged by the NDP. They talk about sensitive areas and delicate things. The NDP is not going to work if all the things that are disagreed on are crucial things like labour, where we come last in the world. You mentioned us coming in the top 10. Our banking system's the best in the world now. Reserve Bank, Treasury. Labour, we're lost. Don't we need a dramatic intervention there that changes the game?
Undoubtedly so. I mean, labour is a critical pillar. And really, the intent of this piece is to show you that there's an interconnectedness between all of these things. We can't address labour in the absence of property rights. We can't address property rights in the absence of labour or educational or healthcare reform, for example. So let's hone in on labour specifically. One of the most contentious issues has been these above average or above inflation wage settlements. Now, when we look at South Africa, let's firstly say that higher wages are not a bad thing. They're not a bad thing for business, provided that they are met with commensurate gains in productivity. Now, productivity is twofold. One, productivity stems from greater capital investment, and that has been deficient for a number of other reasons that we've outlined in the report. But then when we hone in on labour specifically, let's assume we get the capital expenditure right. Let's assume that helps boost productivity. We also need to make sure that we have significantly less downtime in terms of labour actually participating in the economy. We've had a terrible year, in fact 18 months, maybe even going on 2 years now, in fact, since the Marikana tragedy to where we are right now. And that's been this very fractured labour environment. So I'm certainly not out there saying labour unions are evil. Labour unions are there to protect the rights of the workers. Fine. What I am saying is that the engagement needs to be a lot more constructive. We need all of the players. We had a NEDLAC where we had the private sector and we had labour and we had government, and it worked very well.
But government came to ignore NEDLAC. NEDLAC would hammer out solutions which appeared to be sidelined.
Depends on who you speak to. I mean, if you speak to government, they're going to say, we were very proactive to this, and labour actually didn't come to the party. So, you know, it depends, and this is not a blame game. It's not a pointing. What I'm saying is that the structure of a NEDLAC needs to maybe be rethought. Maybe we need to reinvigorate that kind of relationship where there's a cooperation here. But at the end of the day, we definitely need less rigidity in our labour markets. Again, if you look at other countries out there, you can show that, yes, you'll get real wage gains, you'll get productivity gains and more flexibility in that labour market, but that cooperation, that discussion that's got to happen in a productive and sustainable manner, that's absolutely critical to labour relations here.
And is as much about political will as any structural issue in our economy. Mohammed, I'd like to talk more about this, but we can't get through that many words as are in your report. So how do we get hold of this report? What's the easiest way to get hold of it?
Well, first and foremost, my Twitter handle is @Mohammed Nalla. You're more than welcome. Contact me via Twitter. They'll find it on David Williams. I have put CNBC on there. We've got a blog. It's blog.nedbankcapital.co.za. You'll find it on there if you search for structural reform.
Well, I look forward to delving further into Mohammed's report. That's Mohammed Nalla, Head of Strategic Research for Global Markets at Nedbank Capital.